Welcome to the Dream Catalyst podcast. I'm Joan Daniels, your host. I believe God has given you a dream. He has given you a particular purpose and path to walk out in this life. And because God has given you this dream, He's given you everything you need in order to walk that purpose and plan out. All the right people, all the right circumstances, everything you're going to need to equip you and empower you along the way. And that's what this podcast is about. I pray that it blesses you, empowers you, and brings you hope. Welcome to the Dream Catalyst podcast. I'm Joan Daniels, and I cannot wait for you to meet our guest speaker today, Kelsey Daniels. We are not related. How funny is that? Well, actually, probably, Kelsey, we are related, but we don't know how yet.
Yeah, figure it out.
Right? We'll figure it out. Kelsey Daniels is a writer, and she holds a master's degree in psychology from the American International College in Springfield, Massachusetts. And she's also a former Division I athlete from the University of Connecticut. And after a decade of working in the sex industry, yes, you heard that right, Kelsey actually discovered her passion for sharing her testimony of redemption and faith with other women. And it is her prayer that God uses her story to empower and encourage women to establish their identity in Christ and to discover their own God-given purpose. And she actually resides here in Dripping Springs with me, which is how we met. So welcome, Kelsey.
Thanks, Joan. Thanks for having me. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Of course. I of all the podcasts, of all the dreams I have for this podcast, like this is the one I was like, oh, I gotta have Kelsey on. I gotta have Kelsey on. So why don't you introduce us to your story? Because just your intro makes everybody go, wait, what? What? All right. So
yeah,
tell them a little bit about you and how this all unfolded.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in Austin, Dripping Springs area about 5-ish years now. Originally from Connecticut, and as you mentioned, I was a college athlete. So just a unique upbringing in general, but from a young age, I was obsessed with sports. You know, it was where I got praise from my parents, where I received recognition, excuse me. And so kind of just growing up and having a really low self-worth and not knowing God. God wasn't talked about in my household. If it was a really rushed through version of grace. Like, thank you, Lord, for this food. Amen. Sort of thing. So deliberate and no really room for gray area. But so I had some sexual abuse growing up, and I thought it was normal. I had the mindset that I needed to be quiet, I needed to be obedient, and my first memory and my first belief were the same thing. And that was my mother saying, you need to care what people think about you, when I was 5, 7 years old in the kindergarten preschool. And so, as you can imagine, from that day, I was just walking on eggshells, and I was thinking, I need people to like me. I need to not be yelled at by my parents for messing up. And I just constantly felt like I was an embarrassment towards them. And so I grew very shy and quiet. And most of my memories from my childhood are my parents saying, we're sorry, she's just shy, like apologizing on my behalf. And so that really just led to me thinking I was dumb, not intelligent, needed to be quiet. I didn't ever form opinions or preferences or likes of my own. I always sort of defaulted to that of others because I didn't know if my answer would be wrong. And I always think of the Julia Roberts movie, I think it's Runaway Bride, where she's always defaulting to the preferences of her eggs, like for her new fiance. Like, oh, I like them scrambled because I'm engaged to him. Oh, I like them over easy. That's how he likes them. And
I
that's
love that movie.
Yeah, it was a great movie. God bless Julia. And Richard Gere. There's a Pretty Woman joke in here somewhere. But
that's hilarious. I'm just saying. And that was the Pretty Woman movie I thought you were going to talk about. And then when you said the other one, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that one too. That one too. But no, I totally get that. I totally get that reference.
Yeah, but obviously, I know you have questions, so obviously not to dwell too much on that. That was really just my initial upbringing, and it set the stage for a lot of my depression, anxiety, thoughts of self-worth, and my everything was sports. And so when I got to college, well, in high school, I was, sexually assaulted, and I didn't know how to interpret that because it's a moment where memories immediately after it, like large chunks of my memory, are just gone. And I remember thinking I shouldn't have gone to that person's house. I shouldn't have gotten in the car. I was the good student. I had a fear of being late. I had perfect attendance. I was a perfectionist, did everything. And so I, of course, was like, I'm dirty. Like, I was brought up in a household where, God likes good, pure little girls. And so then that was taken from me, my purity. And I was like, God will never love me now. Like, now I'm just plagued and I'm dirty. And so I wore that my whole life. And after that, I write about this in my book, obviously. My mom had read some of my instant messengers, like instant messengers from back in the day, and she had interpreted me talking about it wrongly. And she said, "So what are you, a slut now? So what are you, the UMass slut now?" And I just remember in that moment thinking, making the agreement with myself, saying, I guess that's exactly what I am. Like, I was being sexually abused by my next door neighbor and thinking I had to be a good little girl, or, all of the things predators like that say, like, you don't want me to tell your parents you were being disrespectful towards me as an adult, and all of the things they say, which manipulates a young woman or, young boy. Um, and so really in college, I was low self-worth. I started playing really well, but then my mind and mental health just deteriorated. I was being yelled at. And at that level of play, everyone's great. And so I
Yeah.
didn't know how to cope with a lot of the criticism, which at times was not constructive criticism. It was overbearing and berating and again, all talked about in my book, but I fell into uh, sort of this illusion that a college professor said, college women are going on dates with successful men and they're getting their tuition paid for and, they have money. And as a girl who grew up poor, had zero money in her bank account, and I couldn't even afford to go to Starbucks with my teammates, I was like, that sounded really nice. Like, I'll be able to go out to eat with my teammates. I'll be able to afford the tanning membership and hang
Right.
out,
Who doesn't want
feel like a
that?
normal girl. Yeah.
Right. Right.
And so I
Oof.
started navigating the part of the internet that I never should have been navigating, thinking this was, oh, like, cool. I just meet up with men who will like and adore me and give me money. And I was unknowingly entering into the sex industry and me thinking, I had the Elle Woods logic of, oh, well, if college girls are doing it, it's normal. And if it's normal, it's not prostitution. Like the Elle Woods logic of, you know, working out gives you endorphins. Endorphins make you happy, and happy people don't shoot their husbands. Like, so that was my logic. Like, okay. And so I would show up and I started meeting these men who clearly didn't have my best interest at heart. These are men in their 40s and 50s and are looking for young,
Oh, yes.
16 sometimes year old women on the internet, sometimes younger, right? And
Okay, I have to stop you for 1 second right
yeah,
there
yeah, of
because
course.
what the audience doesn't know is that I've known you for a long time and that we met through church. And I didn't really hear all of your story until a church retreat where you told, and you were so brave to tell the story. And I actually wasn't present for the time where you told the story. My good friend was like, "Did you know?" And I was like, "What?" And so that's kind of how I found out. And then I've had the privilege of reading this amazing story. And I just want to say to everybody out there, this book is going to change lives because the story that Kelsey is telling, although it is obviously all of her story and all of her pain, and she is so raw and vulnerable in this book to tell you all about it, which to me is probably the bravest, most courageous thing I've ever read, honestly. And if you know me, I devour books. Like, I'm usually reading 4 books at a time. I'm like, I just love books. I love learning. So when Kelsey told me, her story, I was heartbroken, but I was kind of fascinated. And I'm just sort of imagining people listening to this, Kelsey, going, like, hold the phone.
Mhm,
So I just want to say the beginning of your story, really identifying as this elite athlete who
mhm,
was on scholarship and having that kind of false identity facade happening so young to you. And not that it's anybody's fault. I'm not saying that, your parents or whatever. It's just the way the world is today, that if we don't have the deep root in, hey, I am a child of God and I am worthy and I am enough, like
Mhm.
everybody. And I feel like everybody on the planet, it's like the plague of humanity to have this thing that says, I'm not enough. So I just want to say to everybody, if you have that feeling, which pretty much everybody does, um, I feel like this book really unravels that lie, that the enemy tries to tell us. And I just want to stop for a second just to honor kind of the kid that was coming out of, a situation where she should never have been, and she was not treated right. And, welcome to the world. This is, one of my mentors always says life's a contact sport. I mean, this is a really rough world that we live in. And but how awful to have your innocence stolen, how awful for you to have to go through that and not know who you really were, and then to have that identity, that false identity, that identity that feels like, the snake skin that we really just need to shed, all of that, like, on such a young life. Because what age did the sexual abuse happen?
Mhm.
And then the sexual assault, and then the transition into what you're talking about. Because I think people hearing you for the first time are gonna go, "Wait, what? You went into the sex
Yeah.
industry?" Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Because we went through that real fast, and I mean, the book is amazing, and it will take you through the journey, but tell them kind of the age ranges that you were and how this, you know what I mean?
sure. Um, and yeah, and I think my biggest struggle at first when writing this book was, um, I don't want people to pick this up and say, "Oh, this is a pretty woman. This is a story about a prostitute or a hooker, whatever term you want to use, who found Jesus." We've heard
Yeah.
that story, and I'm like, that's only in everyone's story, such a small part of it, right? And I love the book What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey, and I can't remember the doctor's name right now off the top of my head, but it's talking about why people do what they do, like what were the pivotal moments that shaped them and affirmed a false identity or led them astray and made an agreement with themselves to where they thought this was okay, right? And to your point, Joan, actually someone who endorsed my book, the Marcy and Dr. Antonio Jimenez, they said some of us are grateful enough to have support systems at a young age, and
Yes.
others of us aren't. And as much as my parents, if they're anything, they are such hard workers. My dad was always working a full-time job, sometimes like two odd jobs. My mom had three kids, was working full-time, and they never missed sporting events, right? So it was never a matter of them being intentionally negligent. It was that the
Right.
poles of the world were all around them and they just didn't have time to look at me, right? And so I was
And
about yeah, and so I was about 7 when the old man next door like lured me away from the side of the yard. And I remember those days so clearly. Like I still have dreams of them, of I wanted to be an archaeologist, and I wanted to be going on archaeological digs and dusting off bones and, exploring the
yes.
pyramids. I loved history and I wanted to travel and I wanted to be a pilot and fly the world and, uncover dinosaur bones. Like I was so curious about the world. And so that happened to me about 7. It takes away your sense of wonder, right? And, the cliche never lose your childlike spirit is so true because we get stagnant in our faith, we get stagnant in our day to day. And I mean, I know I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but I think a big message in my book is never lose that sense of wonder. And if we don't have a dream, where there's no dream, that people perish, right? And so all of those years, I went from being, sexually abused at 7, and then the assault happened to me at 16, and then I was a freshman in college and hadn't unpacked any of that. I
Right.
was just sort of,
How
okay, I need
could
to
you
look
at that
back.
age? How could you
Yeah,
have? I
yeah.
mean,
And
one of the things, Kelsey, that I often say is that we are all, and it's just a belief that I adopted. And one of my things, the first podcast, we talked a little bit about beliefs, but the thing is that, you have beliefs that you've just believed because you believe them. And then you have beliefs that you choose because the lies or the negative beliefs are not serving you, and they're not
yep.
serving God. They're not serving your purpose here on earth. And so one
Mhm.
of the beliefs that I adopted a long time ago is everybody is doing the best that they can what they're capable of right now, or for what they're thinking about right now, because a lot of our behavior just stems from our thinking. And if your thinking was, well, this is who I am now,
Mhm.
right? This is who I am. Well,
Yeah.
then I might as well take advantage of that. And then this is a path to worldly success, right? I mean, I get, and of course I've read the whole book, so I understand your evolution. But man, who could have made a different choice at 16 or 19 or, or 7? My gosh, 7.
Totally. Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean,
keep going
everything
with
you
your
just
story. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to make sure
No,
we had some
I yeah, we're on
background
the
there.
same page. I'm over here like, "Yes, Joan, yes, like, that's exactly what I believe too, yes."
Yes. Amen.
Um,
Amen
and
corner.
yeah, at the end of the day, everything we do mentally is a shortcut, right? We're always using heuristics to remember people's names or whatever the case may be, and so our brain wants to solution things as quickly as possible. We don't want to be taxed trying to remember a person's name or remember the name of whatever store it was in whatever town. Daniels, I'm like, oh, Jeff Daniels, like the actor, and also C3PO. And so now I think of when I was meeting your husband for the second or third time, I was like, C3PO. Like that's how I
Oh,
remembered his
that's
name.
hilarious. I didn't even know. Did Jeff Daniels play C3PO?
Yeah, but I think it was a different Jeff Daniels.
Okay,
Unless it was
well,
Jeff
there
Daniels.
is the Jeff Daniels actor that was like in Dumb and Dumber, and
Yeah,
he's
him. So
he's
he's
an
a
incredible
couple.
actor, but in a bunch of things. But I don't know if you see 3PO. But it's
Yeah.
okay if you do whatever you need to do to remember Jeff.
Yeah, it worked. Again,
We
like
appreciate
shortest
you
path.
remembering him. It's
But
fine.
again, like shortest pathway
Yeah.
pathway.
Yes.
But yeah, I was like, that's who I am. And so
Ah,
fell into that bad situation in college where I was taken under the wing of a man who told me he loved me and, don't get lazy and I'll show you the world, kid. And I believed all of his lies because I didn't know any better. I was in search of a savior, and I didn't know that savior could actually be Jesus Christ, our savior, our Lord and Savior. Like I didn't know that was possible. I'm too dirty, I'm too far gone. My parents can't even see me. Why would someone who created the universe, a God, see me? And so we draw that boundary in that black and white, and it's like, okay, well, I'm a slut, I'm dirty, I'm failing at everything, I'm depressed, I don't know why I keep thinking about wanting to take my own life. And um, so when this man came in and, you know, again, I was a psychology major. I had read about grooming and all of these terms and the warning signs, and it didn't relate. It didn't
doesn't
correlate.
matter. Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause here I am. I'm a Division 1 athlete at a university. I grew up in Connecticut, which has a stigma in of itself. Like picture Gilmore Girls, right? My parents were
I
golden
love
doodle.
Gilmore
Like
Girls. Wait, I love Gilmore Girls.
I know I love me some Lorelai Gilmore, some
I
Lauren
know.
Graham. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, that's not me. You think of, I don't think of, when I first heard the term prostitute, I'm thinking cliche from the movies, right? I'm thinking
Oh, for
a
sure. Oh,
woman
I'm thinking Pretty
smoking
Woman.
a cigarette. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Thinking fishnet stockings, like worn down motel room, uh, drugs, diseases, like every bad thing you could possibly imagine, stigma. Like that's
right,
what your mind points to. And so but I'm like, that's not me. I'm a college student. I'm an athlete, and this man loves me. And he's
right.
taking me to dinner. He's wining and dining me, and he's giving me money. And um, but what took place is slowly the money that was me driving from Connecticut to New Jersey, which is not a short drive, it was about 3.5 hours. Sometimes it was 5 plus with traffic coming back, and he's paying me $500. And as a college student, I'm like, I'm rich. Like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, like the US dollar, like 100. What is this? I've never held this. And again, it was so normalized for me, and I didn't realize what I was doing was that because it seemed so normal. He was telling me he loved me. He was taking me on vacations, but what was at first an hour, us meeting and him giving me $500 soon became weekend stays and trips. And it was always $500. And again, I'm thinking the men on these websites are like, oh, I'm just looking for one girl to spoil. And so this entire time
yes.
searching for
The
belonging,
illusion,
what,
the
yeah,
illusion is there, right? Luring you. And I just
yeah,
want to say really quick, just
drop your
because I've
breadcrumbs.
mentored women for most of my life, and I personally lived through sexual abuse in my high school years. And thank God I was never sexually raped, assaulted, but I was assaulted many times and abused. But same thing, like I know exactly what you're talking about because it took him a year to get me from, kind of this is my first like big boyfriend, if you want to say, like, and he was, very popular at school and blah, 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 all the reputation. So there was that worldly part of, I'm not really who I'm not Joan, I'm this guy's girlfriend. That was my identity.
Yeah.
So I totally get that.
Mhm.
And it took a year. I mean, it took a good 6 months out of that year before it started escalating to a point where, I knew in part of my brain and heart knew this was not right. But by
Yeah.
that point, you're so deep. You're so deep
Mhm.
in the lies that you told yourself. You're so deep in the lies that he's told you about who you are and what you should and should not be and all that stuff, which I think any woman who's experienced domestic violence, sexual abuse, which we know is so prevalent all over the world, but in the United States, we know it's like 1 out of every 3 to 4 women have experienced that kind of abuse in their life. And if you've ever been in that situation, if you've ever been a friend of somebody, you've seen that process happen where they break you down. And I will say, just as a caveat for people, if you have had some abuse, I so highly recommend you get this book. But I also want you to know, and I told Kelsey when I read it, those first 10 chapters are rough. And I've told her, I shared this with her because I know her and I love her. And so to read her story and the way that you write, Kelsey, is so exactly the way you are. I mean, it's like walking into your life. Like I felt like I was walking into your life and experiencing those things with you. So you're a beautiful writer. But at the same time, having experienced abuse myself, I mean, I read those first 10 chapters and spent about 45 minutes crying in Jeff's arms. And I told you that, and not in a bad way, in a good way, in a healing way, in a way that because you're able to voice all the things that many of us have not been able to voice in the book, you're able to talk about how you felt and all the, one part of your brain thinks this and another part of your brain's fighting it and all the things that you went through. I just feel like it healed a deep part of me that at 52 years old, I had no idea. One, that it still needed healing. I thought I did all that with the therapy and all the things. And two, my heart broke for you because no one should experience this. And I feel like the rest of the book is you like rooting for Kelsey and trying to, like if there's any way, I know it'll probably be a movie. If there's any way we could like talk to you and be like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like,
Don't go over there.
yes, I mean, you're just
Yelling at the horror movie. No, don't open that closet.
screaming it.
No, no, abort mission.
What's wrong? Don't
Yeah.
do that. You're worth more. I mean, it was so phenomenal the way that you wrote it because you literally took us on that journey. But hearing it for the first time, somebody might not totally relate. So I just wanted to jump in and talk about that. But keep going. So I know that this, illusion got really south really quick.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the first 10 chapters because that to me, the entire book is about 40 chapters. They're not terribly long. I tried to write it as short stories, like snippets into my life in that time.
Which are hilariously titled. Like I got every bit of your humor is in that book, which I think is so funny. You're so funny. Anyway, keep going.
No, I appreciate that. I had fun with it, but the first 10 chapters, I probably spent 50% of my, no, probably like 60 to 70% of my time was those 10 chapters because and I had to consolidate it. And there's so much more trauma, like I didn't mention, but I
Yes.
mentioned this one book I read, Open Blind Eyes by Rachel Timothy, which was given to me by Marcy, and we both know Marcy
Yes.
Jimenez, and she actually was one of the women that endorsed my book, but she gave it to me and she said, God wanted me to give this to you, and I ordered it on Amazon and I'm reading it. And just for everyone out there, amazing book, beautiful. But what you're talking about, Joan, where you had to stop and cry, like I was reading this book and the way she writes is again beautiful. It's about a woman who was sexually abused and trafficked by her teacher and college coach when she was, I believe it
Yeah.
started, I might get this wrong, around 8 or 9 years old, but very young, um, groomed, like build the trust, the bond. And so I'm reading it and I'm crying for this little girl, like mourning this little girl. But at the same time, I'm starting to get nauseous and anxious and like an unnerving agitation. And I describe it in the book as almost seasickness. And I had to shut the book and I was literally ill. And
Yes, because you go through all of that evolution of how you discovered,
yeah,
like
and
it's almost like we block that piece out, right? And
we
I don't know
normalize
that
it.
people know. I mean, if you haven't ever experienced this, you don't understand that you block that off to protect your heart and to protect your
Yeah,
mind and to protect
yeah.
your life. Like it's not a I'm, like I don't know, and the whole Me Too movement and all that, people are like, it's for so many years ago. Like what well, it doesn't matter how many years ago it is. I promise when you open that box,
Mm.
it is like it's right now. Like your memory is that good because it's so traumatic all that time. So I can only imagine, like, did writing that first part, like, how much of a toll did that take on you? Was it just super emotional? Was it just something to work through? Or I mean, like, how did you cope with that?
So I started writing my story in about 2020. So around the same time, I started reading the Bible and getting to know Jesus and like
God,
experimenting with church. And again, for everyone out there, like I was raised Catholic, but not I didn't know God. And so not knocking any religion, just my immediate household, like I don't even think we had a Bible. So it wasn't a personal relationship with Jesus. It was always uh God as this elite figure that I couldn't touch because I am a noble on the outside of the gate. So why would he pay me any attention? I'm dirty, I'm covered in rags. And so that's how I viewed the relationship. So I started going to church to rule it out because I had, as I mentioned in the book, a client suggest I go to church. And then also I had a good friend, Lena, who is a beautiful person. She's a missionary over in Zanzibar. She will go up to women selling themselves on the street and addicts and say, "Can I pay for your time? Can I tell you about Jesus?" And so she's just doing great work over there. So maybe that's a topic for
amazing.
later
Yes,
on
we
with
will link.
another
We will link.
podcast.
We have to
Yeah,
link any of the information about her so people
yeah,
can find her because that's an amazing ministry.
yeah. But all of that to say, I went to church to rule it out because I was like, this is not for me. A bunch of people who think they're better than they actually are, who are putting on their Sunday best and who only want to judge me and tell me how bad of a person I am. And so I was bitter towards so many of these things and in my life because that's the story we tell ourselves, right? Like I'm not changing my habits because backtrack groomed by this man, ended up being sex trafficked by a group of men at my college campus, which again, I normalized. I was like, this is who I am. They're giving me attention. They like me. Um, One of them is a state trooper, so clearly this is normal, but you don't think about it. All I saw was the attention. I had just gotten kicked off my college lacrosse team for fighting. And so all of this was going on. The man who told me he loved me, Anthony in the book, was getting me engaged in some very sexually explicit things that I didn't know how to do. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know I could say no because it was the
Yes.
fear of abandonment. He would just up and leave me at a restaurant or up and leave me at a train station and I'd have no money. And I was always hungover. I was in pain from the things he would do to me. He would beat me. Um,
It's awful.
but
It's
so
awful.
by the time I got to church, I was like, men are awful. All men cheat. Like, this is not a place I need to be, let alone would be welcome at. So it's all the components. And now here I am, and I wake up every morning and I say, thank you, Holy Spirit. Like, good morning. What are we doing today? Like,
Yes.
thank you, Jesus, for another opportunity to grow closer to you. And I'm over here looking at my window and a cardinal just dropped right outside my
Oh
door.
my gosh.
So,
And earlier, before
I
we
love
started recording,
cardinals.
there was a beautiful deer
Yeah,
outside our window. That's just a God wink. That's just a God
yeah,
wink that we're doing this.
100%. A God
And
wink. I like that.
and I just want to say really quick that, interesting that you said that about, how you felt about men. One of my many conversations with my husband early on, I want to say, we met in college, but like right after college, we got married, somewhere in there when I was really still dealing, because I really didn't recognize like you the abuse until later on and in college actually it was a psychology experiment, go figure. It was about date rape. And I was supposed to just fill out the questionnaire and what ended up happening was the questionnaire was like supposed to be 30 minutes and it took me 4 hours to complete. And then I spent the rest of the day in tears in my husband's dorm room, like crying my eyes out and
Mhm.
realizing what had actually happened. And so that's, just I had buried it so deep. But I told
Mhm.
him, at one point, and I mean, again, early in the marriage, I said something like, there's a deep belief in me that if the world, if the apocalypse happens, if the zombie apocalypse happens,
Mhm.
that most men, like maybe 80%, would just
Mhm.
rape and pillage and take whatever they wanted.
Mhm.
And there maybe be 20% of the men who would stand up for us and protect us and help us. And he
Mhm.
was like, "Oh, no, that's totally wrong. You've got it actually opposite. It's 80% of the men would protect and serve and help. And 20% of the men, you're probably right." And I've tested this theory with many other women and many women who have been abused or raped or assaulted, all experience any of the awfulness, feel the same way. Like you have this worldview, and that goes back to what's your worldview, and a lot of what we're thinking is protection. A lot of what we're believing about what we can do and what our purpose is and what we're capable of and what God can help us with. Like all of that's just shaped around our thinking, which is so important for people to get that it's just thinking. And just because you needed to protect yourself at that time doesn't mean that that same belief system still serves you now. So oh my
Sure.
gosh, you gotta tell them about what you experienced at church, because don't you think like most of the world these days is bashing Christians and their, judgy attitudes and all of that. So I would love for you to talk about that.
Yes, and I mostly know that because I used to be that person. I was a career bartender after college, and I remember so clearly I had forgotten about it until maybe 3-ish years ago when I started reading the Bible myself, and I felt like God just brought back this memory. And I remember bartending, and a girl came in and she sat down at the bar and she opened her Bible and was just going to order lunch. She was in town for a conference or something. I don't remember if it was a conference, but she was just passing through. And I remember being like, you know, better her than me, right? Like, and
Right.
then even with my friend Lena, she was like, I found Jesus, I gave my life to him. I'm sober now, I'm not drinking. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how on earth am I going to break my sweet friend's heart and tell her that this God, right? I would put in air quotes, is just going to disappoint her and let her down. Like, this was my thought philosophy behind it. I'm like, listen, all of this had happened to me up to this point, and I'm like, I'm either clearly not worthy of God's love and protection, or he doesn't exist, or everyone else is better than me. And so, with all of these beliefs, I'm just bringing myself lower. I'm pulling myself further away from the rest of the world who is more deserving. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, well, Lena's a really good person. It would make sense that God would come after her and do good things in her life. It makes sense. But for me, and I'm looking at my resume, like failure, abandonment, alcohol, all of that stuff. I'm like, well, not me, but her, definitely. I'm rooting for Team Lena too.
And why is
And
it so easy for us to see that, but we can't
yeah,
see, our own worth? And it's a
yeah,
human problem. We see and that's the problem, right, with social media. We talked about that before we started this. One of my main reasons for doing this podcast is because I've been told myself, and Kelsey knows me. I really don't have any secrets. Like I really do tell pretty much everything about my life. I mean, there's very few things that nobody knows. Pretty much everybody knows. My poor husband knows that everybody knows. And now I have a podcast, so look out, Jeff. It's gonna get worse,
yeah,
right? But the thing for me is like we always see other people as this shiny, perfect social media person. And that facade that the world or the enemy wants us to believe about everybody is so untrue. Like, if you're breathing, you are still a work in progress. If you're here, you were created for a purpose. Like, from birth to
and
death, it's one big classroom. Welcome to the class. We're all in the muck of it. And I think
yeah,
knowing that now, I mean, at 52 and been through all the muck, and I'm sure I'm not done because I'm still breathing, so I'm sure there's muck ahead. But my whole point is just, like I feel like that judginess isn't a Christian thing. That is a worldly thing, and it's not always judgy of look how pathetic that person is. It's also judgy of look how perfect that person is. Look how perfect their life is.
yeah,
Look how the wealth. Like I remember leaving Plano, Texas, and I remember a realtor telling me, like, how many foreclosures were happening. And there was these people in these ginormous homes that had zero cash and had to lose their house to the bank. And, you know, looking from the outside, you're going, they have the perfect life. I want that life. Right. So, and then you had this amazing transformation yourself into kind of the best version of pretty well, shouldn't say the best version because the best version is she got out and went with Richard Gere, but the
Mhm.
version where you got successful, right?
Yeah, and no, you're 100% right. And I think just to social media, I had someone in my life say, just remember that's their top 1%, top 1% of their life, right? So
That's right.
this isn't their full life. This is the top 1%. This is the image, the brand, and power to everyone who can put the top 1% out there. To me, I was at the state where I said, I can't put the top 1% out there because that's my other identity. That is my, escort call girl version of
False
myself. And
identity.
in the book, I
Yes.
call her Natalie, which is funny because I had someone tell me, Natalie, that's not a call girl's name. That's a really nice name. I was like, well, then what is a call girl name? Like, I think Natalie's a nice name. But and so at first I was receiving all of this time, one in that environment, I say to it in the book is it is the perfect smoke and mirrors to a relationship with Jesus because here you are, two people, intimate setting, um, time doesn't exist, there's no judgment, there's no distraction, phones are off, the outside world is shut away, and you are talking to someone one on one and seeing their vulnerability, their biggest mistake, you both kind of know each other's biggest secret at this point, and
Well, can we stop for 1 second on that? Because I do want you to talk about this because this wasn't in the book. I'm sure it's going to be the second or third book, which are
tiny
coming.
piece, it's a tiny piece, it's in there though, but yeah.
But I do want to say this because when we sat and talked about your journey just before I
Mhm.
read the book, one of my biggest questions as a wife was because a lot of these men were married, some of these were
Mhm.
Christian men, was my gosh, like, what advice do you have for us as wives, or like, what can you tell us about why men would do this? Like, like, I'm so naive and in my little bubble, my little pink bubble of happiness.
Mhm.
I literally did not really think that prostitution existed except for like on the streets of Calcutta or something
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
weird, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like Sound of
stereotypical, yeah,
Freedom, like in some foreign country or like
yeah.
on the streets of New York where they're all strung out on drugs. Like,
Mhm.
I forget what the big madam that was, I don't know, all the craziness that's happened over the last 20 years, but somebody was exposed as a big madam and all these people came out. But I was like, what are men like? Why are they paying for that? Like, don't they why would they pay for it? Or, you hear about a famous actor who, gets arrested because they're soliciting prostitution. And you're like, wait, what? Like, aren't you like the worldly perfect 1% of fabulousness that we're all supposed to be trying for, right? So talk to that. Like, what would you tell us about that? Like, what are these men seeking?
There's a lot of people who are sex addicts. So we'll say that off the bat.
Yes,
There's a
sure.
lot of people who um are so rooted in escaping themselves. So I need a drink every day at this time. I need to keep a flask in my car. I need to, um I need to have sex. And that's just something they need to do, like to satisfy a physical urge, like an addiction chemically.
And to
So there's
escape
that
the
piece.
world, to escape the
Yeah,
world,
escape the
right?
world. But I
Escape
will
their
say
thoughts, escape their pain.
the biggest piece is, they say uh men's biggest fear is failing, women's greatest fear is being abandoned. And it's that vulnerability in I if I told my wife some of the things I feel on a day-to-day basis of how I feel my company might fail, of how sometimes I feel so inadequate, how I'm always living in my father's shadow, or whatever it may be, there's countless examples I heard. Um, my wife would leave me. My wife would think less of me. My wife wouldn't think I am a protector and strong and capable of providing for the family. I wouldn't be able to, wake up every morning if my wife looked at me and had a sense of disappointment. Um, and so it's the fear of failing, it's the fear of being seen as less than the self you want to present to your spouse. And so I saw a widow, and I mentioned this in the book, and he told me, like, great guy, like amazing, like philanthropy and all this stuff, and a good heart. Like I would just say that we all make bad decisions, but he had a good heart, and he told me that he's like, I lost the love of my life, and now I seek out what's fleeting and available. And so
Oh,
opening your heart up to someone new and exposing yourself is a level of vulnerability that takes intention, it takes brain power, it takes, opening yourself up on a level that is just time consuming, taxing, and people don't want to do it. So as a man, it's easier for me to call a girl who's, cute and might can carry on a conversation, whatever qualifications they're looking for, and confess to them. Yeah.
I think, and my story too, and how Jeff and I, we've been together, we've been married for 30 years in September, and we dated for 4 years before that. So 34 years of my life. But this past year, after 4 years of Jerry Springer seasons, back to back to back in my life, which if I was ever judgy before, I am not judgy now.
Crazy how God will do that.
right? I know he will just keep peeling the layers,
I will
sister,
never
until
be
you it's
that.
just
Oh,
you and
now I'm
him,
doing
man.
that.
Right?
Will never be
I
that
know.
person. Oh, now I find myself being that person. Okay, I
Exactly.
see
Like,
the
don't
point.
be judging because it's coming your way.
Because I'll walk you
Um,
through it.
right. Well, anyway, one of the things that I feel like was really pivotal in our marriage, which I'm gonna have to do a whole podcast on that, was the Sean T. Feldman books of for men only and for women only. And for men only, they talk about men, their main drive is to provide and protect, and they are the strength, and unfortunately the women are the nurturers, right? And we want to feel beautiful, we want to feel loved, and a man would rather be unloved but respected. And we go, what? Like, I would much rather take love over respect, but men are opposite of that. And so I think as women, we have to learn that about our man, and that, when we're nagging them, and when we're just trying to get all of our, computer windows closed, as Shanti puts it, we have all our windows open. We're just trying to get those things closed down. We're not, it's not that we don't trust them to get it done or whatever. It's that we're just trying to get all the windows down so we can rest, because we're multitasking all the time. But to me, like, that book saved my marriage. I mean, it really did, because I saw what I was doing to undermine him as a man and what he needed. And I feel like for all of us, all we can really see, if we're not shown with a book or outside or God, all we can see is our own needs and wants. And we really don't see always the rest of the world and what's happening. So it's so extraordinary that you have this perspective that allows us to see kind of into that world of, like, what in the world is going on here? And why would people seek that out when they have a spouse at home, or they have a girlfriend or whatever?
Yeah.
Um, it makes total sense. I mean, everybody is just trying to be enough. They want to be seen, they want to be loved, they want to feel important, they want to feel like they're doing a good job. And yeah, I totally
Mhm.
get the vulnerable piece. And don't you feel like too, just through the COVID crazy that we've lived through over 4 years, like, that connection is a piece that we are just missing right now. I feel like everybody during COVID did all kinds of things to cope, right? Drink too much. I mean, too much TV, too much, binge watching movies, whatever. Cigarettes. I know people that just completely blew up in their weight. I know people that got addicted to exercise. God bless you. If you bottled that, I would have taken it. But but
Yeah.
the rest of us over here were just trying to feel okay, right?
Yeah.
So I get that piece of, hurting and not having the connection and needing to find a way through. And if you're not leaning onto God, you're probably leaning onto something that's worldly and something that feels comfortable and is comforting. So it totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't like to put people in boxes, but I think people did one of two things during COVID. They sought everything outside of themselves, the folly of this world, right? For fulfillment, a sense of normalcy, peace, whatever void they needed filling, or they went internally and said, how do I fix me during this time? How do I
Yes.
not just
The
see this
healthy
as
version.
a
The healthy
pause?
version.
Yeah.
The
How do I not just see
I
this
was over here in the
as a
unhealthy.
pause?
I wish I was over in the
Yeah,
healthy. God bless the people that were
yeah.
examples, but I was not. I was terrible. Anyway, keep
I
going.
mean,
So I want to get back to church too when we get there. So keep
yeah,
going.
no, yeah, let's go back to church. I was like, where I have so many things running on in my
I
mind.
know.
I love how it is
That's
when
why I
Joan and
told you.
Jim
I
talk.
told you this
We have
yesterday. I was
4 hour
like, don't worry
missions.
about it. You're going to come on multiple times because we're never going to get it done in like an hour. I mean, you and I mean, we've never even had lunch for an hour.
Yeah,
So
no, it's
keep
not a
going,
thing.
keep
So, back to church. Again, I went to rule it out. If you just want to jump to that in my book, the name of the chapter title is Old College Try. So, because that's what I was doing, I was like, I'll show up, I'll say I went, and then I'll report back and tell it's not for me. I'll say I did my due diligence. Um, and I remember going and saying, in my chair, looking at the sermon, wrong, wrong, that's not right, wrong,
going.
disagree. And it's because everything they were saying was truth, which I didn't know then, of course, didn't align with my beliefs of, no, that's not true. Of course, if you mess up, God is going to punish you. Like, of course, um, I am written out of God's will. There's no way of coming back by saying I'm sorry. I've done that. I've been told, do the 10 Hail Marys, the 5 Our Fathers, and tell your parents I love you. And that kind of played into how love is an act. Everything is acting. Because I can just go up to my parents and tell you I love them when I, at that point, didn't know what love was. Love at that point was an obligation, was something to fulfill a requirement to get in the good graces of a God I already felt so far from. And um, my friend Lena, I talked about earlier, we bartended together. We used to drink together, party together, and now she's a missionary over in Zanzibar doing the Lord's work, like amazing stuff. Um, she told me, well, I'll save her story because that's in the book a little bit, and then one day she's going to tell it. But she had a breaking point and, went to a church. She said she was going to take her own life at this point, but she felt this nagging, almost impeding thought that she couldn't dispel. Call a church, call a church. So she said she went on Google, phoned a church, and said, I need help. I'm not okay. They told her to drive down. She sat in the pastor's office with the head of women's ministry, and he said, just so you know, you don't need to be um I'm gonna what did they say? You don't need to be okay to come here. You come here to get well, to foster a relationship with Jesus. And she told me that, and of course, I'm not going through it yet. Mentally, I'm not there. I'm
Right.
thinking my friend's in a cult. She's giving
Yeah.
10% of her money to a
She drank
church.
all the
She's a
Kool-Aid.
poor PhD
Yeah.
student. She doesn't have an income, and we're cooking a meal for a homeless shelter or homeless woman shelter, a women's shelter, excuse me. Um, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, like my friend's in a cult. I need to get back to Austin and figure out how I'm going to save her because now she's talking about leaving her doctorate program, which she had about 3 semesters left, I think, at that point,
Oh,
to move to Africa and become a missionary. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is not right. Like, this God is going to abandon you. Don't abandon everything you have right here on paper for taking a risk on God. Meanwhile, every day of my life is, all right, God, like how it changed, right? And it's really just walking through it, right? Being in the middle of it to finally comprehend and understand. So by the time I'm at church and I'm working heavily as an escort, right? I'm making a lot of money. I am starting to
like
gain a
a
sense of
lot of money,
self-worth
y'all. Not a
and
little money,
value.
like a lot of money. I just want to point out it wasn't a little money,
Yeah.
it was a lot of money, like a very tempting amount of money, y'all, of lifestyle that you and I would all be excited about living. I mean, honestly, right? That's the lure of the where you ended up, which is
Yeah.
unbelievable from where you came from the horrors that you came from to be able to be that way, which one of my favorite things you say, I'm sorry I keep interrupting you, was that I'm like
No,
the
it's fine.
smartest girl in the world because here I am,
Mhm.
like, look at me, let me
Yeah.
whip my hair back,
I'm getting
right?
paid to have margaritas by the pool. I'm the smartest girl in the world. And then you see throughout it, I'm making assumptions and I'm doing um mentally not the right move. That's in total, you know, opposite of what is written in the Bible and what God tells us to do. And I have these moments of I'm the dumbest girl in the world. Like I'm the dumbest girl in the world. But then I know I compartmentalize myself. I'm getting ready for a date. It's like I'm going to make $4,000. I'm the smartest girl in the world. Why? Because I could justify I'm making this money now. I'm owning my body. The world has told me I'm a slut. I'm a whore. I'm stupid. I'm a homewrecker, I'm a Cancer. Like the world has already told me I'm all of these things. So finally, I'm harnessing this and I'm serving myself. I'm taking care of myself. I am protecting myself because I hadn't been protected. I am providing for myself because, I didn't know how to up to that point. And like you said, I could justify it because I was the smartest girl in the world. I had used everything the world, all of the labels that the world had attached to me. And I said, if that's what I am, fine. I'm just going to embrace it. And
And that's the power of your story, by the way. That is the power of your story because as the reader, when you're telling yourself all the bad things, we're shouting at you in our heads, right?
yeah,
And then you're telling it yourself, like, look at me, I'm the smartest girl because I'm rich
yeah,
and making
yeah,
thousands of dollars in a day and da da da. We're all, and then we're like, no,
yeah.
this is not how you were created, So it's like, it's such a, and again, Kelsey, I just want to thank you for writing this book because you and I've talked about this. This podcast for me was the scary thing to do,
Mm,
but not nearly as scary as what you did was literally go through the entire thing of how this happened. I mean, talk about opening yourself up. So I can only imagine walking in and having been in, which you'd already been in, our church and hearing all the things and seeing the sermons and seeing the songs and meeting people who you've met and then
mm,
walking up to our pastor and telling him what you did. Like that
yep.
kind of guts. I mean, it just tells me like, dang, Kelsey
Well,
is like
I'm
fierce on the inside. Like I mean, that competitive, fierce
spunky.
person that's
I
in
was,
there, you were in
yeah,
there the whole time. It's just, we were just shouting through the whole book for that lioness to come out. And like,
yeah,
anyway, it's amazing. But tell about
yeah.
Pastor,
I'll tell that.
what
Yeah,
happened.
I'm glad you brought that up. And
And
so,
Connie.
yeah, and Connie and the Trinity, as I call them in the book.
Trinity.
But um, so it got to the point where I'm sinning, but I'm driving out to Dripping Springs to this church on Sundays, and really because it started to pique my curiosity. It started to make me think and question. And up to that point, I had been caught in the hamster wheel of my own thoughts. And so now I'm getting different perspectives and people telling me different things that don't align with my beliefs. And being the psychologist in me, I was like, I will debunk this. I'm going to debunk the myth that is church, that is Christianity, that is, there's salvation in Jesus. I was out to prove it wrong. I was like a modern day Lee Strobel, just like walking in there, like, I'm
I'm
going
gonna
to
report
disprove
back.
all of this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on the next episode of Mythbusters. Like, this is me. Um, but it got to a point where I was so curious, and in worship, I had a stirring within me that I had always attributed to anxiety, and I wanted to cry. And it was in church that since I was so present and I was intentional about being there and listening and experiencing it, that God just started stirring within me. And my entire life I had disconnected from my body. I had gone on autopilot. Whatever I would work, I would just shut down. My mind would go elsewhere. I genuinely say in the book, I would leave my body because in all of the abuse, like you just learn to disassociate, to detach, to shut your mind off. I think of this episode of Black Mirror where they have that impediment or whatever it's called, and you know what I'm talking about? And their eyes
I don't.
glazed over.
Yeah.
There's this episode where they can play back memories. And so
Mm.
their eyes glaze over like cataract and they're reliving past memories. And it's almost like that. Like I would go dark, my brain would go elsewhere. And, you know, whatever was happening in my body would hopefully be done soon. Like, and then I could leave. And but in church I was so present and there, and I started being able to allow myself to experience emotion and the mind body connection that is so important. Um and so it got to a point where um I would go to church and I hid. I sat in the corner. I didn't want anyone to talk to me. I avoided the coffee table like the plague because I didn't want any chit chat. I was there for research only. Like I wasn't there to form community or make friends. Because what do I have in common with any of these people? And that's what I thought. Who am I? And so I went to life track meeting to learn more about the church. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn more because I'm a person that everything I do is my idol, and church can be no different. I'm an athlete. I'm going 100% athlete. I am a call girl, escort, whatever you want to call it. I'm 100% that. That's who I am. I become what I do. And church can be no different. And I remember that day, I was like, as long as no one asks me what I do for a living, I'll be good. And I sat down in the auditorium seat and introduced myself to the woman next to me. She's like, oh, hi, I'm Kelsey. Nice to meet you. Oh, awesome. What do you do for a living, Kelsey? And I'm like, for Pete's sake, like really. And
Very
so I
first question.
was,
Yeah.
I was like, I'm done. I'm not gonna keep coming here. And the Father's House was one of by Corey Asbury. I can never say his
Yes.
last name right. I'll get it right someday. For the amount of times I tried to remember it, it hasn't stuck yet. Like leave your shame at the door, it ain't welcome anymore. And I was like, how can I leave my shame at the door of this church if everyone asks me what I do for a living and I can't disassociate? And so I said, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not coming back here. I'm just gonna burn every bridge on my way out. So, and that's what we do, right? When we get uncomfortable, we start to self-sabotage. And
And
so
isolate.
we
And
cut
isolate.
ties.
Both.
Yeah. And so I walked up to the pastor there and I said, hi pastor, I'm Kelsey, like nice to meet you. Oh, Casey, how you doing? I was like, it's Kelsey. And at that point, it almost took me a minute because I'd been so used to calling myself my, other life name, Natalie in the book, that I had
Yeah.
to be like, no, wait, my name is Kelsey. Yeah. I was like, no, my name is Kelsey. He's like, oh, nice to meet you, Kelsey. Like, how long have you been coming to drip? Oh, like, 5 months, whatever. But listen, like, what I don't care about that. I need to tell you something. I'm a prostitute because I figured using the biblical version of the term would be like most direct. I wasn't trying to candy coat anything. And he
Right.
said, oh, Kelsey, like, nice to have you at our church. Like, how's your walk with Jesus going? And I was so mad. I'm like, is he deliberately ignoring me? Or he
Like, did he
heard
just
I
gloss
said,
over that? Yeah.
yeah, did you just
Yeah.
are you not listening to me? Are you proving the other belief that nothing here matters?
Right.
And I
It's all
said,
false. Yeah.
yeah. Did you not hear what I said I am? Like that's what I said. Did you not hear what I said I am? And I remember that so clearly because God has brought me back and what you do is not who you are essentially when it comes to that context. And he said, Kelsey, your sin or whatever you're going through in life is between you and God. Like, I'm just here to help you on your walk with Him. How's that going, by the way? How long have you been walking with the Lord? And I just had a moment where, like, every piece of grief and self-defense hit me all at once and collided. And I did what I always did, what the bartender did in me, what the call girl did in me. I shut off and I turned on the mode that was pleasant and agreeable. And I was like, oh, I'm good. Like life is great. Like thanks for having me in church. I'll probably hit the coffee table on the way out, like muttering nonsense because I'm like, what just happened? What did he just
How do
say
I
to me?
even deal with that? That he didn't reject me. He didn't go, get out of here.
And
You're
I
a
was
sinner.
mad. I was
Yeah.
mad at first. I got back to my Jeep and I'm thinking, okay, well, clearly I heard him correctly because he repeated himself. I asked him to clarify. Did you not hear what I said I am? And I said, I thought he was going to tell me I'm disgusting. Like my mom had told me I'm a slut. Like my college coach had told me I was a cancer. Like I thought I was going to be
Yeah.
rejected, how everyone up to that point had when I'd messed up. And I thought he was going to say, well, I'm sure there's some other churches you can go to, or, um, yeah, well, that's nice, but this probably isn't the place for you. This is like, hill country in Texas. Everyone
Yeah.
here lives very pleasant lives.
Right here,
It's
shiny.
probably,
We're all
yeah,
perfect.
everyone's very
Yeah.
shiny. You're a
You're
little
not as
dust.
shiny. You
Like,
should probably go
you should probably leave.
shine
You're not
yourself.
shiny. And
Well, and talk
so
about Connie too, because that was so, I feel like the same
yeah,
thing, right? You can just briefly talk about that. I know we don't have all that much time left. So
yeah.
talk about what Connie did
Mm,
as well. Connie's one of our mentors who we love, Connie Hagen. She's
yeah.
also a book
Love
writer.
Connie.
I'm
Yeah,
going to have her on. I hope to have Pastor Brock on as well. But yeah, talk about Connie because I felt like that was just equally as moving to me.
yeah. She came up to me one day in church and she introduced herself and she said, we should get coffee. And I'm like, okay, I'll give her my number, but I'll always come up with an excuse. I'm not meeting the head of women's ministry for coffee. Like, can we start smaller, God? Can we start smaller? Like, at the head of women's ministry, I don't want to get coffee with her. Um, but I did end up getting coffee with her and we talked and she was like, tell me your story, tell me about you. And I'm like, oh gosh, I already need a drink. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna, how do I not lie to the head of women's ministry and tell her what I do for a living, how I'm a career failure, but now I'm succeeding at something that is the ultimate sin? Like, how do I tell it to someone? Um, but her and I formed a great friendship and she helped me debunk a lot of the false beliefs, because just like how you were saying, you read that book and you like met your husband where he was and came down to his level. That's what Connie did with me. And she told me, it's not my job to judge you, it's my job to love you. And again, I had one of those moments that, the pastor said, "You're welcome here." I said, "No, no, no. Like, can you repeat that? Because it doesn't make sense to what I know as my own truth, what I firmly believe. Like, no, your job is to judge me. Your job is to judge me over whether I get field playing time on the lacrosse field. Your job is to judge me as to whether or not I am the sugar baby you should choose and tell you
Oh,
love her. You are everyone who decides whether they judge me, whether I'm worthy of time, whether I'm worthy of investment or not. Like, that's of course who you are. That's everyone." And she said again, "No, it's not my job to judge you. It's my job to love you." And I could tell she meant it. Like, I saw
yes,
the
yes.
words almost come directly from her heart out her mouth and be delivered, upon me. And I believed her. And in that sense, I believed what she was saying. And again, I had that moment of, well, if she's right about that, what else am I wrong about? And so began the opening myself up to seeing the truth, to, reading the Bible and God's word and meditating on it day and night, right? Stitching it on my heart, keeping in the forefront of my mind, and, cross-referencing it against everything I knew from birth to be true. From, you need to care what people think about you. That right there is in direct violation of what a lot of the word says. Like, you will have trials in this world and obstacles, but take heart, because I've overcome the world, right?
Right,
And
right.
like, you will have trials. You don't need to appease everyone in your life. There's a difference between pleasing people and serving God, right? And I couldn't distinguish that for the longest time. There's a difference between bending to everyone's will out of obligation, or serving them, out of your heart and out of need. Um,
Man,
and
what a
so,
journey. What a journey. Like this is
oh
just
man, it's been a ride.
well, and I don't want to give the whole book. I mean, I feel like we touched on things, but hopefully we didn't give enough of the book away that I mean, you've got to go read it because it is amazing and just the journey that you take. But I think, what's so cool, like I said earlier about it, is that you can see the folly of Kelsey Daniels. You can see her beliefs. You
There.
can see what's happening. You can see the lure and the things and the travel and all the things you've done and go, well, who wouldn't want that life? How do you give that life up? So I just want to touch on this because I did ask my husband this morning, because of course he experienced the book through me. He has not read it, but because I didn't feel like I had permission to let him read it yet. But he because you hadn't fully, it was like not completely done. So I was like, when it's
Yeah.
done, you can read it. Um, I think that was more about me probably than him, but but anyway, my whole point is I said to him, if you could ask Kelsey a question, like what would your question be? And he said basically, well, one, which we kind of covered, like, how in the heck did you come from where you felt or how you felt about yourself to getting to a place where you
Mm,
could accept God and love? And then the other big thing we talked about was, and if you could go back, you know, and tell your younger self something, like if there's something that you could give that person who was broken and thought all these false identities were them and that the world was judging them and that they were caught in sin, and not even just sin, like they may not even be aware about sin. I mean, they may be just trying to be comfortable today in the moment, just get out of bed, just do as the minimum they have to get to the drinks. Or, and I
mm,
will have to say, Kelsey, you and I went through I went through something, and I lost a dear friend due to an alcohol related thing, which is why I gave up alcohol myself, because I could not believe that alcohol lowered my resistance enough to the enemy to have us have an argument that could potentially cost me a lifelong friendship. It just was like a game changer for me. I was like, okay, God, that was my wake up call. I'm not doing that ever, ever, ever again. But I remember talking to you about that after it had happened. And you said to me, Joan, don't you realize like a lot of people feel the way that you feel after that incident, after having that alcohol incident that was just terrible? People feel that like 321 days out of 365. And I mean, it stuck with me because I was like, wow. And you were like, maybe God needed you to see that so that you could relate to those people, because some people are stuck in that muck all the time. And
Yep.
anyway, so that's what I think of is if someone by chance, by God's grace, is listening to this and is stuck in that place, or like I said, if you go back to Kelsey in younger years, like, is there something that you would say to them? And I know you could not teach them all the things, but like, what would you tell that person?
I, there's been so many times where I almost see myself watching myself as the girl in winter on the New Jersey or Connecticut train platform, and I'm underdressed, I'm freezing, I'm hungover, I'm in pain from like all the ways he beat me and all of this stuff, and there's no one home. There's no one home, and I'm just waiting for the train to arrive, and um I almost there's more. There's more than this, right? And I mean that's just the really short version, but I remember I was on a date with a gentleman. Again, no one home. I'm saying all the things, trying to be fun and trying to get them to like me. And I remember a nurse so clearly was in that restaurant and she walked up and she was leaving on her way out. She stopped at the table and she said, "You're better than this." And I had forgotten all about it until actually I had a friend with me. That's a story for another time. I tried to get like a friend. I was like, let's meet this guy for coffee and they'll give us $100. And I had forgotten all about it. And she remembered, she's like, Kelsey, don't you remember that nurse that one day in college? And I said, no. And
Yeah.
she said, you're better than this. But again, like I wasn't open to hearing it. And that's the thing. The enemy has blinded the eyes of us to where we can't hear the good news. We can't see what people are showing us because we are so seeing the world in black and white and we're living in black and white versus, there's people saying, hey, if you want to live in a world with vibrancy and color, like, let me tell you about Jesus, right? And that is Lena going up to those women in Zanzibar. That is Connie saying, it's not my job to judge you, it's my job to love you. And Marcy and you and Allison and the Trinity, I call them in the book, meeting me right where I was at. And they weren't saying, leave up this life of sin or God isn't going to bless you. They weren't saying that. They're saying, how can we help you? Like, what stories can we share? Like, I can tell you how I've experienced exactly what you're feeling, if not lived the same experiences. I've felt the emotions you're feeling. And that's why I think the book is so relatable. But if I could share one thing, it's that I used to say my biggest fear was living a mediocre life. And I saw, I never saw a healthy relationship play out before my eyes, so I didn't believe it existed. Um, but God revealed to me over the years that I'd been confusing mediocrity with a lack of sincere love and true love that just hadn't been around me, that I hadn't been immersed in.
Wow.
And so I'd never experienced the heart of Jesus. I'd never experienced pure love. So how could my earthly mind comprehend what love is when my economy of everything I've experienced, mental economy up to that point, hadn't seen it? And
Right.
so, um, lost my train of thought on that one.
Well,
But
just
if I could
just the
say one thing, oh, I
keep
remembered
going.
it.
Yeah, see, you just need me to
Mostly,
stumble
yeah,
around.
I just yeah, to women in my former industry, like, yeah, there was luxury, there was gifts, there was time, and there was attention, what people desire, being desired. I was addicted to the time people were investing in me and seeing me. But now my biggest fear is not living up to how I can use my pain to show others that there's a way out. And I used to see the industry I was in as cloaked in luxury, and then, oh, there's just something I have to do for a little bit. But outside of that little thing, it's gifts, time, and money, and freedom, and working for myself. But then all I saw it was for everything that was behind the veil. I saw it for the act I was implied I was meant to do. Um, and at that point, Jesus had radically changed my heart so much I couldn't imagine someone's hand on my shoulder because I was like, I'm so precious. I don't want just anyone touching me. Like God has touched me. I have the Holy Spirit living inside of me. I don't want to share those intimate parts of me with anyone. And so all of that to say that you were meant for so much more, that you're better than this, that there's more. And there's beauty. And I can't think of a better success story than to find out who you truly are and how God sees you, because that's what he's making you more Christ-like through this journey. And I want to know who that version of myself is. I want to know who, you know, the version he formed in my mother's womb. Before he created me, he knew me, right? I want to meet that version. Um,
Yes.
that's kind of where I'll leave that on that. Thank you
Well,
for
that
sharing.
was amazing and remarkable. And I do think that's the whole point of this podcast, is to get people to understand, like, you're here for a reason. You're made for a time such as this. You're
Mm,
not in the wrong place. You are actually in the perfect place. God meets you right here. And that you are capable of amazing, tremendous things that you couldn't even comprehend right now. I mean, can you imagine the young girl who was with Anthony, um,
mm,
like saying, hey, you're going to write a book and you're going to be interviewed and you're going to be, this amazing writer that's going to change lives. I mean, that girl probably could never have comprehended that, right?
yeah.
So I just think, there's hope. There's hope. You're right. There is just so much hope. And again, like, I know you're going to have to come back on because we have so many more conversations we need to have. So this is just episode 1 with Kelsey Daniels, I have to say. But thank you for spending all this time with me. And we are going to put everything about your book. Is there a way for people to connect with you before I ask you your last question? Is there a way for how is it best to find Kelsey?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Kelsey Daniels _. And then also follythebook.com. So you can pre-order the book on Amazon starting July 2nd. So there you can subscribe to the newsletter, stay up to date in the know. So those are a few avenues. But thank you again, Joan, for
Oh my
inviting
gosh,
me on
I'm
the podcast.
just
It's been
blessed that you came on. Like, I'm so excited I got to read the book already. Okay, so here's my little rapid fire questions for you, because
okay.
not everybody has the dramatic story that you have. So I wanted to end with just some few quick questions. So these are just your answers. You don't have to worry
Okay.
about, them being perfect. But number one, who it has been the biggest inspiration in your life outside of Jesus?
Ooh.
It's hard, right?
Um, yeah. I don't know if I'll get I would say John, the character John in the book. And I say it's because the time in which he came in to my life and how he saw me through this journey. For those of you out there, I had a client give me my first book, but I was never physical with this client. So what you think a call girl does, I never did it with this client. And he held boundaries and he kind of debunked the myth that love is sex, like the two things are together, which is how I knew it. And so he was a righteous man. He pointed me in the direction of my church. Um, he got me thinking in a very approachable way, meeting me where I was at in my job. And we were just two broken people having a conversation, but he would just reiterate that you should get to know Jesus. He's a pretty cool guy. He's pretty all
He's
right.
he's like the little angel in your story, I know.
Yeah.
Okay, what book other than the Bible has been the most helpful for you at this point?
There is a lot, but the book that changed my life is called Leadership and Self-Deception.
Ooh.
And it's by I think it's the Artbinger Institute, but it's basically about all the ways in which we lie to ourselves. We unconsciously put other people down in order to boost ourselves up. And so it's really all about perspective and approaching everything we do with truth and seeing others as people who are in need of compassion and stewardship, the same compassion we ourselves at the end of the day want.
Oh, I can't wait to read that one. All right, what is one dream you still haven't fulfilled yet? What's on your bucket list? Just one. I know there's probably a bunch, but what's one?
Just one. So the first book, this Folly, is the story. I didn't want to teach, I didn't want to preach. I just wanted to tell a story. I love stories, and I think that's what captures people's heart. So the second book is I want to deliver people and not instructions, but a guide to how I did it. Because to go from believing that what I was doing as a sex worker was okay, no, I shouldn't say that, like was okay, and that I believed I was entitled to it because of all of my hurt. I thought I was justified. And to then Jesus sort of changing my heart and seeing a different perspective, I want to kind of showcase my mental patterns, so to speak, and all of the debunking of the beliefs that I had. So
Ooh,
a
I
big
can't
dream
wait for
of mine is
that.
really,
I
yeah,
hope you write a
just lay it
workbook
out
for
in
that
my
one
hand.
too.
Yeah.
Can you write the
Yeah,
guide and accompany a workbook so we can write it all out? Because that would be good.
you
Just
got
saying.
it.
Maybe that's your fourth book or third book. Okay, so that's awesome. So that's coming out. That's on your bucket list that you're writing this book. Is that what it
Mhm.
was? Okay.
Yeah.
And then don't you already have a third one? You already have a third one too, right? or is it
Yeah,
throw in the workbook? Did I
there's a
steal
couple
it?
in the works. No,
Okay,
you,
I'm
there's a
excited.
couple in the works.
I'm like, did I
We're
just
trying
unveil a
to
mystery?
feel,
Okay.
yeah, trying
Okay,
to
so
feel
the fourth question is, what's the most amazing place you've traveled, or where's the place that you really want to travel if you haven't traveled that much? Like where's the place that you like if you go to your happy place, what does it look like? Where were you at? It was beautiful and you loved
yeah.
it. You've been
I went
you've been a lot you've been a lot of places, so
Yeah, I've been to a handful of places when I was bartending in college, but Greece was beautiful and anything on the Mediterranean, I would love. I've never been to Italy, south of France. I would love to go to those places.
love
There's
Greece.
something about the Mediterranean that is so therapeutic and so rejuvenating. And, I went to Greece for a week eating all the fresh tomatoes, the feta, all of that, and I came back had lost like 7 pounds. My skin
Right.
was radiant. I was in the best mood, and it was the Mediterranean sun and but mostly it's the small, simple interactions, like saying hi to the fishermen in the morning.
Well,
And so
well, and the
I'd go
food
back
is so
there.
amazing. Yeah, the food is so. What town in Greece were you in that you loved? Was it Santorini or was it other places?
Um, I loved
Do you remember?
Paros, which is this really small fishing island.
Very
Um,
neat.
yeah, it was really quaint.
Okay, I'm
I,
looking that up. So
mhm.
I will work for travel. So that's like one of my hashtags that will be on my grave.
I like
So
it.
that's why I asked that question because I love to travel. So all right, and then the last one is just, do you have any hidden talents that we don't know about? Like what do people not know that you have a talent at? I mean, that maybe you
Um,
didn't reveal in the book. No one knows this, but I can do this.
I can play the piano. So I took piano lessons for
Oh,
years, and I am really good at picking up languages. So I do about 15 minutes of a language every day. So I can get by and barter
amazing.
for goods in foreign countries. Right now I'm
That's,
learning Arabic.
that
So
sounds
I'm
like a superpower to
Egyptian
me.
dialect. So yeah,
Wow,
I love
that's
languages.
amazing.
And I think this is just a gift of the spirit. I was walking with Henry, actually a client, and I opened a book that was written in French. And I was like, oh yeah, it says blah, 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 blah. And it was two paragraphs, and I'd perfectly
Oh,
translated the French. And I was like, I have no idea how I just did that. Like, I've never studied French. So I
well,
think it's just a
that is a
knack.
God gift. It really
I have
is.
a
That's
knack for
amazing.
languages.
Yeah, that's so
So
cool.
that's my
That's so
odd
cool.
superpower.
Well, that is a fun superpower to have. It's one I would definitely like. That and remembering names. If I could have those two things, man, life would be good. Well,
Yeah.
thank you again for being on. You're amazing. I just pray over your book, over you, over God's protection over you, just from all the trollers and all the haters out there, because I know there will be some. But the thing is that we need to focus just totally on who we can help and who we can reach. And I just feel like your book, everybody's in the same boat. I mean, if you don't think you're in the same boat with everybody else, then look around because you actually are. We're all in the same
Mhm.
boat. We're all in a broken world. We are all sinners. We have all fallen short. And I just feel like your story is just so full of hope and so full of that ability for God to reach us no matter where we are. Or,
Mhm.
I mean, for people like me who are like, that even exists still.
Yeah.
Hopefully this podcast will reach somebody too that will lead them to your book and then lead them to God and all that God has for them and all the amazing dreams that God has planted in their heart for you to be able to do. And I'll just say to everybody, I believe in you. If God gave you a dream, he has given you every bit of everything you're going to need to accomplish it. All the people, all the right circumstances, all the mentors, all the books to read. All you have to do is take that leap of faith, right? If you want to walk on the water, you got to get out of the boat, which means we got to get out of our comfort zone and we've got to start trusting and we've got to start believing in ourselves and God's plan and in what we can do in the world. So thank you so much for being on, Kelsey. Appreciate
That was
you.
wonderful. Thank you, Joan. And everyone listening, we all need Joan Daniels in our lives. All right. We need Joan Daniels. We need her dreaming, her vision, her hope, her encouragement. And she played a very big role in my journey to where I am. And she downplayed that a little bit, but what a wonderful woman with a pure heart, clear vision, and wanting to empower women. And so she endorsed my book, but that has nothing to do with the fact that I endorse this podcast, completely separate. But she's added so much value to my life and wisdom and leadership. And so tune in for more episodes.
Oh, you're so sweet. I
We'll
love
be
you
better
so
for it because
much.
I am.
We're family, even though, I mean,
We're
we are actually family somewhere. I said that to Jeff. I was like, we're gonna figure out how we're related because somewhere down the line we're related. But
It's
it
an
doesn't
Olive
matter.
Garden commercial.
You're,
When
yeah, you're
we
my
were
heart,
family. Yeah.
right? You're my
Yeah.
heart. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much. And thank everybody for listening.